A bulk supermarket that gives away all its food has provided a helping hand to many thousands of Christchurch families over the last 10 years. The 0800 Hungry Warehouse, started by former truckie Kerry Benjamin, is tucked away in a back street of the lower socio-economic suburb of Wainoni. But this is not your little backroom ministry. When you step through the 0800 Hungry doors, you suddenly appreciate the magnitude of this operation, which is unique in New Zealand, if not the world.
It's 18,000 square foot of the building. The way in which we handle things in here is we're more of a food warehouse than a food bank. We clear the stocks, bring it in, break it down, turn it into food parcels and send it out via volunteers from churches and from the agencies throughout Christchurch.
How much food do you go through in the course of a week?
Well, we're doing close to 300 food parcels a week. Now that's varying in size from one person through to large families. We've got oranges, we've got carrots, we've got potatoes, we've got bread.
But you cover a fairly wide range of stuff?
Yeah, there's biscuits, flour, right through into feminine products. We've got for the women, we've got baby products here for babies as well.
How did all this get started?
It would be just a little bit over 10 years ago, and God laid on my heart, well actually, in the words of the classics, he spoke to me and he says, I want you to open a food warehouse. I know exactly the time, the date and where it was. And I spent a month thinking about it and praying about it, and before I actually started going out and talking to anyone about it. But there was 2 years of prayer before we were able to open the door, and we actually opened in the building right next door to the one we're in now. Had 7,000 square feet, and we were in there for about 15 months, and the company that owned it sold it and we had to move out. We moved across the road to a larger building, which we were only allowed in for a year until the owner came back in to change it into his main bakery, and the only building that was left was this one. So literally, as the carrying firm was going out of the back door down there, I was bringing stuff in through here, and we've been here for just on 6 years.
What sort of people get help from this?
Everyone, the needy and the greedy. It's one of the things that we look at, is that we believe about 15% of the food parcels go out by people that abuse the system and know how to work the system. But it's only for a period of time. They get picked up because of the computer programming we have in there and the databases that we keep. But if we master on that 15%, we lose the focus on the other 85%, and that's what God put us here for.
What makes this different from other food banks?
Well, the basis is that we're not working on the front line. I mean, one of the things that God laid very, very clearly on our hearts at the start was that we were to be a mule ministry, the M-U-L-E ones. And I always refer to that to people as saying in the First World War, if the mules didn't take the food and the ammunition in the front line, you couldn't fight. And God didn't call 0800 Hungry to be on the front line. That's His church and the agency people. So we're here as a resource centre to provide the necessary tools for them to carry out more efficiently the work that God's called them to. You never know who's on the end of the phone when they ring in. But basically there's all sorts of situations that develop, from deaths in the family. A lot of the tragedies in Christchurch we find when the greater extended families come in and we're putting food into there. But basically it's those on the lower incomes that struggle. We helped one family for about 3.5 years, but they worked with an agency and they got into a situation where there was bankruptcy was looming, but they chose to try and work their way through it, and they worked with an agency person who stood alongside them and made sure everything was, heading in the right direction. They got through it, and they got onto a savings plan, and they're well ahead now. If we can put food into a home when there's been a disruption, they can usually work the finances out. But if you take the hardship of no food and finances, there's a likelihood that the family will break up. There was one in particular that a pastor went to, and the woman had developed cancer. Now, her income was required to pay off the house because, like all young people, I'd got into a mortgage situation. I think she had a child as well, and they were really struggling, and she was trying to go back to work when she was in no condition to go back to work. And we were able to put the food in and continue to help them until things started to come right. Now, I don't care whether it's de facto relationships or whether they're married families. The God we serve is there to take care of the kids, and that's what we're here for as well.
You're no stranger to hardship yourself. Tell us a bit about your early life.
Well, I was one of two young guys at school that was brought up without a father. My parents had split up when I was about 2 months old, and I suppose that's a bit strange. We were brought up by our grandparents, over on the coast, and Mum worked as a relieving postmistress, so she was up and down the country, and more like a sort of visiting sister when she came home in the early years. It was a well, I could call it a struggle in going through secondary school. I sort of left with a leaving certificate in the end of year's report when I was 15. I never did go back again. But basically I worked in labour, doing labouring jobs, tying steel on the hospital block over there, until I was 18. I could get a heavy traffic licence and drive trucks, and that really became my life. Moving from one end to the coast in those days, you had to pass a lot of hotels, and they even considered that my truck was constipated because it couldn't pass a pub either, but that was the way of life over there. During the early years I'd also learned to fly, and got my private pilot's licence, which was also a big thing to me, and it's one of my passions is aviation, though I've never been able to go through it for, be part of it for years now. I came over to Christchurch in 1975, but unfortunately my marriage split up in 1980, and that set me back a wee bit. The loss of my brother a couple of years earlier didn't help either. Like all young guys, we grew up fighting each other. We only had to look at each other, and there was a punch swap backwards and forwards. But we're just getting back and becoming brothers again. But unfortunately, he got into depression where he was on a roller coaster ride, and he took his own life, and that was pretty shattering as well. So life was heading southwards for you. But what turned things around? When I came home and found I was the only one left, and I was heading in the same way. I suppose it was a lesson where I found out just exactly where my brother was, because you could never understand why would somebody take their own life, as to what depth. And I was sitting in my office in Christchurch contemplating the same thing, and I remember that my mother had written me a letter. Now, she used to barg the earth out, and she had become a Christian, and every time she wrote, you need the Lord, you need this, you need that, and everything else. And I can remember seeing this letter in the desk when I opened the drawer up, and then I took it out and I started to read it, and it had a commitment prayer in it. And it was quite funny because I sort of read it, and I can remember tears were just pouring out. I was just really, really, I needed a set of windscreen wipers on. And there was just something in me said that I needed to read it again and mean it, and I did. And I rang my mother up, and she went away. She hung up for a wee while and went and rang somebody up, a guy by the name of Tom Camp. And then she rang back, and we spoke in the office, and Tom came down and sat with me and prayed with me, and he left, and I went home. This was from the verge of suicide myself. I went home and got changed, and went down the pub and had a couple of jugs. Things don't change instantly. I presume it wasn't all plain sailing from there? Oh no, it's been a struggle, and I was doing a flight safety magazine, and I tried to get that back up and going, and it just wasn't possible. Everything I've sort of done is, because there's never been a great amount of cash flow around, you try to do from behind the 8 ball. So I ended up working in different jobs, and as you look back now, it's really dress rehearsals for the rest of life, because where I've been and what I've done has put me in stead for what I'm doing now in the operating of the food bank, even to the fact of where I was working when God called me. It was rotating stock. I walked away from him for quite some time, but it's only pain and that brings you back again. I could always hear him puffing away in the background, but it took him a long time, and it's just over 10 years ago since he called me into this ministry. And one of the things that I had to learn was that God was no longer interested in any ability I had. He was only interested in my obedience, because if he didn't have my obedience, all I was going to do is my will in his name. And I'd been doing a bit of that before.
Tim, how long have you been delivering stuff for 0800 Hungry?
For about 3 years in the Hornby district in Christchurch.
What sort of people are you taking it to?
People of definite need. There's a wide range of different people. Some of them you can see that actually have the real certain need. They've had problems with health in their families and that. Other ones, just they have had different situations in their life where they can't afford food for that week, and so they need food for their families to live on.
What sort of difference does this make to their lives?
Quite often they really appreciate, most of them just appreciate the food they get at the end of the week, and they know that they're okay, their family's going to survive for the next couple of days. Others who drop stuff off time and time again, and needs also counselling into their lives to make them actually change their lifestyles. the food is just one small part of their lives.
How long have you been delivering for 0800 Hungry Paul?
About 8 months, 9 months. Well, from when I deliver, they certainly enjoy receiving them, and they say how much they appreciate 0800 Hungry.
How critical would it be for them?
That's a hard one, because some, obviously, they have got a little bit of an income and they do get some food from somewhere, but it does certainly help them out quite a lot.
Do you get much of a chance to talk to them when you make the deliveries?
Sometimes, but most of them just want to receive, and that's it.
But on a daily basis, we have set people that come in that have stayed faithful to the ministry, those that drive the trucks, those that stack the shelves, those that make up food parcels, bag up the potatoes down the far end, because everything comes in bulk.
About how many volunteers do you have?
I was looking the other day, and I think somewhere just working in the food warehouse, involving the kids that come in from the schools, and that's somewhere about 60 on rotation through the week.
Is it just Christian people who help here, or do you?
Some are not, and we worried about that in the initial stages, thinking that it needed to be Christian based in here. But you can't affect anyone if you're just surrounded by Christians. And as we started letting non-Christians in, we started to see the effect on their lives, because they get to see how good God is in His provision, and how the struggles go on, but somehow we always seem to get through at the end of each month. Somehow